Hello everyone, so we're going to start making some ornaments. The first thing you want to do is press out your clay flat using the heel of your hand and go ahead and roll out your clay on your canvas or your fabric. I'm using two rulers here to be able to keep my clay about 1/4 inch thick. If you do not have rulers, you can also use two plastic hangers that you might have at home. If your clay is really wet and sticking, you can fold the fabric over your clay like you see there and sandwich it in between. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's rolled out all the way. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my texture on. So here I'm using some fabric, like a lace fabric that has some patterns in it. You can use something like that. Tablecloths work really well, stamps. This is a foam stamp that I have. You can also use like an old sweater. You can cut up an old sweater and use that as a texture. Anything that you have to put some textures in your clay, you want to start with that. Next thing you want to do is get some cookie cutters. I like to use a large cookie cutter and then a small one. Make sure that you have a surface prepared to go ahead and put your ornaments on. I like to use a piece of wood, but you can also use a cookie sheet with some newspaper over it. Just something that the clay is not going to stick to. You don't want to put it on plastic or metal. Make sure that you put some sort of paper underneath it. So I'm going to use a large cookie cutter and then a small shape. I like to layer up my ornaments. So you'll see that I'm showing you how to layer it up. You want to make sure that if you're going to put two pieces of clay together, you need to score it or scratch up the back of it and then just use a little bit of water. You want to make them really sticky so that they will stick together and they won't fall apart when they dry. So you'll see me pressing that on, making sure it's stuck on pretty good. You can also make your own clay glue, which is called slip, with your extra little scraps of clay. You can put them into a little plastic container with a lid, and you can make basically like a mixture of clay and water to create a little bit of slip. But if you don't have slip, the water's fine. Just make sure that you scratch it up, and like I said, make sure it's nice and sticky. So I'm going to go ahead and press those together. I also like to use a lot of letter stamps on my pieces. I buy these letter stamps a lot of times at Hobby Lobby. You can get them at the dollar spot at Target a lot of times, Michael's, Amazon. But like I said, most of these ones are ones that I've found at Michael's or in the Target dollar spot. So go ahead and put your stamps on there. I also like to use different tools. This is a chopstick. I love using different things that I have around the house. So I want to go ahead and add some little patterns around the edges. The more patterns that you add, the cooler it's going to look when these are painted. We're going to be doing a dry brushing technique with some acrylic paint on these when we're all done. You can see that a lot of times I'm wiping off the tool. The clay is pretty wet, and so sometimes the tool will get clay stuck to it. So if you do get clay stuck to your tools, just continue to wipe them off. Again, make sure that you're using wood tools are the best. Anything plastic or metal will stick to the clay, especially if your clay is really wet. You could always blow dry your clay with a blow dryer for about 5 minutes so it's not quite so wet, and then continue to put your impressions into the clay. Next thing you want to do is put a hole into your ornaments. I use a piece of a straw. I cut the straw into about 2-inch sections, and once the clay dries a little bit, I can just roll it and squeeze it out. Also make sure the hole is about 1/4 inch away from the edges of your ornament. Last thing I'm doing is I want to make sure I'm smoothing any sharp edges with my finger and a little bit of water. Remember, this is clay, and once it's fired in the kiln, it's going to be sharp. Take your extra clay and ball it back up and put it back into your bag. I like to try to get most of the air out of my bag, and then I'll kind of smash it back into a square shape. And if the clay is kind of drying out, you can drizzle a little bit of water in it. So I've left the clay out to dry for about an hour or so. Again, you could also just take a blow dryer and blow dry it for about 5 minutes. If it's a nice sunny day, you could set it outside for 5 minutes, but you want to wait until your clay is hardened. It's not dry all the way, it's still wet, but it's hardened so that I can pick it up without bending. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I smooth those edges on the bottom. You can use your finger with some water, or I like to use a sponge just to damp sponge. Try to squeeze most of the water out and make sure you get rid of any sharp edges. If there's sharp edges on the hole, you can also use like a Q-tip. I'm going to use a dull pencil. Like I said, the clay is leather hard. It's still soft enough where it'll make an impression, but I have to let it dry and kind of harden a little bit. But using a dull pencil is a great way if you want to put a message on the back, or you want to put the year that it was made. And like I said, if you want to, you can even just let your pieces sit out. It's kind of cold weather right now, so you may even be able to let your pieces sit out for a few hours. So these are the finished products. Don't forget that when you're done, you want to package these up, let them dry, and bring them back so that you can get them fired before you paint them.